Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles, as we search the Scriptures for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
We're studying this morning in the book of John, chapter 8, verse 1. John chapter 8 and verse 1. Then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. The Pharisees therefore said unto him, Thou bearest record of thyself, thy record is not true. Jesus answered and said unto them, Though I bear record of myself, yet my record is true, for I know whence I came and whither I go, but ye cannot tell whether I come or whether I go. Lost, aren't you? This is one of those sections in the Scriptures that, beginning in the latter part of the 7th chapter down through verse 11, is bracketed in many of the newer translations, and many of the so-called study Bibles will have a note on the side that these verses do not appear in some of the most ancient versions or translations of the Scriptures. Now, I find this an interesting thing because many of those who are very quick to say that Mark 9 through the remainder of the chapter, Mark 16 verse 9 through the remainder of the chapter, was something that was added on later, and again, they bracket those things, and they use that primarily as a way of trying to discount what Jesus is quoted as saying about going into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be damned. And so people say, since that wasn't in some of the oldest translations, aka about 2, it doesn't belong there. Now, while I'm sure there is some controversy among biblical scholars in the sense that we like to debate anything and everything, they find an excuse to argue over just about everything. What I find is interesting is very few people ever say anything about John 8, 1 through 11. I think just about every preacher I've always known has good sermon about him that is without sin. Let him cast the first stone. See, that comes from here. Matter of fact, so popular is this concept of he that is without sin casting the first stone, that it's actually really part of our vocabulary. It's part of our everyday conversation about, we're not supposed to throw stones, and let him that's without sin cast the first stone. Even people who don't know anything about the Bible know about the lesson that Jesus taught here in John 1, or John 8, verse 1 through 11. And so I find that interesting that they will talk about this sermon here, or make a sermon from these verses, because it's just such a good sermon about not casting stones. But at the same time, they'll turn around and say, we really shouldn't follow Mark 16:9 through the rest of the chapter because that's not in the older translations. And so there's a bit of hypocrisy in that to use a good set of verses because it's a catchy phrase and it's a catchy sermon here in John 8. But, we disagree with the theology of Mark 16, so we'll discount that, but we'll include this. And I imagine most of you, unless, again, you remember from our study of the various translations, few of you ever even thought about whether John 8, 1 through 11 belongs in the New Testament. It's just there. It's part of what we have come to know. It's part of what we have studied. As I said, I'm not exactly a big fan of the so-called oldest and more accurate, so they claim, translations. But, the other translations and handed down around the world are these verses. So my point in all of this is that, if you're going to take it out, take it all out. Don't put it in brackets. Again, some translations actually don't have, some of the modern translations don't even have Mark 16, 9 through the remainder of the chapter even in there. Or they'll even sometimes separate it to the bottom and make some kind of footnote on it or put it in brackets or whatever. But again, they love this part here. So you either have to accept the whole Bible or you got to reject it all. Now you either got to reject John 8, 1 through 11, as well as Mark 9 through or Mark 16, 9 through the remainder of the chapter. You got to include them. But you got to make up your mind to again exclude one, include the other, pick and choose. That's again the downfall of modern theology and modern Christianity. We get to pick and choose what we want. We slap a bracket on this and we don't include it. We don't, have any problem with this. So, it's in here. It was a part of the older translations. What do you got today?
I got the Coverdale.
Coverdale. He didn't put it in there, did he?
1535.
In 1535, they didn't put it in there, did they?
And he said unto them, Go ye your way into all the world, and preach the gospel unto all creatures. Whoso believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but whoso believes not shall be damned.
What does John 8, what's John 8 and 1 say?
That's what you think. It said Jesus went to Mount Olive early in the morning and began into the temple, and all came unto him, and he sat down and taught them, and said, Scribes and Pharisees called unto him, and a woman took in alabaster. And keeps going.
Okay. But again, even in his translation, John 8 and 1 is there, and it precedes that back through. And so, this modern day textual criticism and picking and choosing and all of that just brings out a great deal of confusion. When people for hundreds of years, 400 years with King James, and then when we go back through the older versions of Coverdale and just keep going back, they're there. And because one or two so-called ancient translations don't have it, or didn't include it. We don't know why it wasn't there. And again, it's all speculation. But if most of the Christian world has embraced these verses as being a part of the Bible, we need to be very careful about cutting and pasting. You know, one of the things that troubles me is, I've been again studying on this for some time, and we have Thomas Jefferson, and I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the Thomas Jefferson Bible, but Thomas Jefferson took a pair of scissors to the Bible and he cut out the passages that he really liked and that he felt Jesus really said and taught. And then the rest of it, he just pretty much laid it off to the side. And so I saw a facsimile of that Bible, and it is available for purchase. I don't necessarily recommend you buy it. But I saw a facsimile of it, and, it's a cut and paste job, literally. And so lots of people want to cut and paste, and they want to reject one thing and embrace another. And this is another reason why Christianity is broken and divided. We're going to include it because that's part of here. And so we're going to actually now go back to the real John 8 and verse 1, which says, Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again unto the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. And when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest unto the last. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. And such is the reading here of the actual first part of the book of John. As we look at this, as we enter into the 8th chapter, we see a custom of Jesus really is that he did not stay inside the city of Jerusalem. Generally, when we see him going there on these festivals and holy times, Jesus would go into the city during the day and go into the temple, and he would teach and preach. But it seems in the evening he would leave and he would go back to places like Bethany, to the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, or he would just go up to the Mount of Olives and where the olive orchards were, and he would commune basically with his disciples and those there in the midst of these spaces. I think, that Jesus was a man who grew up outside of the big city. Nazareth was not a big metropolitan city. He was a carpenter and no doubt worked out in many different areas, but not in a lot of closed-in spaces. And so it seems that he enjoyed the freedom of just the wide open spaces, so to speak. Another aspect of that may very well be the fact that he had enemies and they would be looking for him, and therefore he chose to get out of the city and go away to places where he could be left alone, where people did not necessarily know that where he went and what he was doing. And so we see here that as everyone went to his own house, back in verse 53 of the last chapter, Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives. And so rather than going to someone's house there in town, he went back in and to the Mount of Olives. It's about a mile to the east of the city of Jerusalem. It is the mount that most of us see pictures made from when we see the Temple Mount that's there, and we see the mosque that sits on the Temple Mount today. Most of those pictures are taken from the Mount of Olives. It was an olive orchard there. The Garden of Gethsemane was a place where the press was there in this area for the olives. And so it was a place that provided a little bit of shelter with the trees and all, but could still see the stars at night and be there alone and to oneself, have the opportunity to hear if anyone is around and about. And so he goes back there, but in the morning, early morning, he came again unto the temple. Now, the third hour of the day, 9 o'clock in the morning, was one of the times of prayer, and people would go up to the temple and would engage in prayers and devotions and various acts to get their day started. And as the people were coming into the temple, since Jesus had got up early in the morning and came to the temple, as the people were arriving, no doubt he was already there. It wasn't a matter of wondering, will Jesus come? Will he be here today? Will he teach us? He was already there. And so as the people began to congregate there in the temple, and as he's discussing and talking about these various aspects, they're there, and an interesting situation presents itself. Jesus was there early in the morning, and he was there, and he sat down and was teaching the people. And in this time, or in this process, we're told the scribes and the Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. And then in the italics it says, as though he heard them not. An interesting situation, and I'm sure we've all heard something about this throughout time, as I said, just about every preacher has his favorite sermon about this. Yes?
Like we was talking about that earlier, how do they get the people, how do they come about this? Mary Magdalene. I've never read that nowhere.
That I don't know. I mean, there is the Catholic Church teaches that Mary was a prostitute and was one of the prostitutes who Jesus, but there's nothing in the scriptures
Well, they're not telling the truth either.
Again, it's just as Paul would say, it's just fairy tales. It's those fairy tales that are there to lead us away from the scriptures. And so the interesting thing here is they come to Jesus and they feel that they have an ironclad situation because they say that this woman was taken in adultery. They don't just say that she committed adultery because that's a matter of opinion. You have to have absolute proof. And if she's not going to admit it, and there wasn't any witnesses, at least 2 witnesses to testify, you got a problem. But they got a good story here because rather than getting into an argument over whether or not there's enough witnesses and what were these witnesses doing there to see her and whoever engaged in adultery and on and on and on. Of course, if the man himself had testified, it's just 1. So you needed at least 2 to convict. But this one was taken in the very act. And so there's no need to question whether or not she committed adultery because she was in the process of committing adultery when we caught up with her. And so they put her in the midst of those who were there in the temple. And, they say, well, the law of Moses says that, the penalty for committing adultery was to be stoned. And what do you say? Now, here's the interesting thing. The Jews are not allowed or not supposed to be able to stone people and put people to death under the Roman rule. At least that's what we're told, because that's why the Jews had to work with the Romans to get them to crucify Jesus. And so if Jesus encourages them to stone her, then, they can turn him over to the Romans or others because he's broken some of the laws and the things that are considered proper by the Roman authorities. And of course, if he chooses to say, no, well, don't stone her, but by all means, let's don't stone her, then they can accuse him saying, well, then you break the law of Moses, and therefore, because you break the law of Moses, you most certainly can't be the prophet that would come. The prophet that was supposed to come, like unto Moses, most certainly that prophet would never have us break the law of Moses. And if it was the Messiah, most certainly the Messiah would not have us break the law of Moses, because in their eyes, that was going to be the law of the kingdom. I mean, that was so they think they've got Jesus in a perfect place. And of course, there are a few things along the way that have been questioned and brought up. The question is, if she was caught in the very act, one of the first questions comes up, where's the man? You can't catch her in the very act and not catch the man too. Which brings up the question about, the fact that they caught her and supposedly whoever was with her in the very act. Some have even questioned, did the scribes and the Pharisees set this whole thing up? I mean, did someone do this in order to find themselves a woman who had committed adultery? They never intended to do anything to the man because he was one of their cronies. But they were looking for a woman to be scapegoat. I mean, if she's stoned, so be it. And if she isn't stoned, then so be it. And however it turns out for her, so be it. They didn't really care because they were more interested in coming up with a reason to stone her or to deny Jesus. And so they think they have an airtight situation. There's no arguments here about witnesses because she was taken in the very act. Therefore, whoever was there, if there were those to testify of that. And so as they tempted him, we're told that Jesus stooped down with his finger and he wrote on the ground. Now, as we look down here, we see that they have added in italics as though he heard them not, but he didn't at least apparently have a comment directly. So then they continued asking him. They brought the situation to Jesus and they presented it to Jesus, but Jesus did not answer them directly. He did not give them a quick answer. Many times when they asked Jesus a question, he was very quick to answer their questions. We can see that in Matthew chapter 22 when they brought people to tempt him. And I don't think Jesus is going to be taken by surprise by this either. But they keep insisting. And of course, we have all these witnesses that are there. People are coming into the temple. Nothing like a good stoning or a good hanging to get people's attention. Hey, there's a woman about to get herself stoned up here in the temple. Y'all better come and see this. Sadly, human nature is you drive by a car wreck and you just got to look and see if there's a head laying on the ground or, if a body through the windshield. People drive by and they rubberneck every time. If you've been through a wreck, you know the people in front of you are going to slow down when they get up there, and the police are going to be upset and they're going to be arms going to be going 100 miles an hour trying to get you through there. And so it brought a lot of attention, and they continued to ask him. Now, we don't have anything to tell us exactly how long or how many times, but, they kept prodding him to give them an answer. And I'm sure that built them up. Give us an answer. Give us an answer. What do you say? What do you say? We know what Moses said. What are you going to do? What should we do? And so they kind of kept that going. And so they continued. And he lifted himself up from stooping down on the ground. He got up, stood up, and then he said, "He that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her." Now, of course, most people quote that, "Let him that is without sin cast the first stone." That's not exactly the way it reads here, but the implication is still the same. But, whoever is sinless, since you want to point out her sins and you want to act upon those, and since apparently you're more righteous than her, then if you're without sin, go ahead and cast the first stone. It only seems fitting that the morally just and upright should be the ones that stone her. Paul tells us, of course, in Romans 3, and quoting from Romans 3, 10 through 23, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There's none righteous, no, not one. And so, in a way, he flips that back around on them, because if they attempt to stone her, then he's made the point that if you don't have any sin, go ahead and throw a stone at her. Well, if they throw a stone, then they break the law of Moses, because Moses said all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, or the old law, or the Old Testament says that. So he all of a sudden flips the thing back over. Can you say that you have no sin? That's really the question he's asking, though he words it a little bit differently. And then it says he stooped down and wrote on the ground some more. Now, it says, "And they which heard it, being convicted by conscience, went out one by one." Of course, we have in italics their own, but those were inserted, but it doesn't change. I mean, if your conscience convicts you, then it is your own. You're the one that makes that. They went out one by one. Some people had to think about it just a little bit longer than everybody else. The ones, it's interesting, but that they tell us here that they went out one by one, beginning at the eldest. The oldest or eldest person, one would assume, would have a better understanding of the scriptures and would have more life experiences that most certainly they wouldn't want people to drag out into the open. And so, beginning with the eldest to the youngest, they began to walk away. They began to leave. And we're told, "And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst." She was still there, her and Jesus. This is an interesting thing because Jesus waits until everybody has left. And it seems as I read it that he didn't just get up when the last one left, but he just kind of was still down writing on the ground, and she was standing there wondering what was going to ultimately still come of her. No one has excused her, and what's going to happen to me? And so she's still there, and for whatever reason or however the situation presented itself, whether she was framed or what, she most certainly had committed adultery. Of that, there is no doubt. And of that, here's the thing. Either she was married and they knew that, and she was committing adultery by having relationship with someone else, or she was having a relationship with a man that was married. And here we go again. If they knew that he was married and she wasn't, and it was adultery, then they knew who the man was, so why wasn't he there? But anyway, Jesus lets her stand there for a while, still thinking about her own particular situation. And the Jews, the Jewish leaders, the scribes, the Pharisees, they had their motives. Jesus was much more interested in the future of this woman. What would become of her. Now, it would most certainly be unfair that if she was tricked into this in some way, but she again did it. As I say quite often, it's pretty hard to accidentally commit adultery, just like it's pretty hard to accidentally commit fornication. I mean, you have to pretty much put some thought and effort into the idea. So she's not innocent by any means. Whatever the circumstances, she did commit adultery. Jesus doesn't argue that point. So she has time to stand there. I'm sure she's heard of who Jesus was. And so she's wondering, what's going to happen. Now, I don't know how much time was there, but it says Jesus, when he had lifted up himself, there's a certain bit of, I hate to use the word, but there's a certain bit of theatrical stuff going on here. I mean, Jesus is getting down on the ground, he's writing around, and then he has to lift himself up. And when he lifts himself up, you expect some great proclamation. And so when he lifts himself up the first time, as he's doing that, he sees what's going on. He writes on the ground, he stooped down. And so here he raises up and he looks at the woman and he says here as he gets up, "Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee?" She said, "No man, Lord." And Jesus said unto her, "Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more." Jesus did not say that what she did was correct. And he was the only one there without sin who could have picked up a stone and stoned her if that was the case. But Jesus was well known for his mercy. He did tell her, though, to go and sin no more. Yes.
I think Jesus had the power to know if it was what they said or not.
I'm sure he knew whether it was a setup.
Yeah.
It's got a fishy smell to it. There's stuff going on here in the background that just doesn't seem straightforward and honest. And of course, when we're talking about, I hate to say it, but when we're talking about the scribes and the Pharisees and that little clique that was there, especially in the temple, who was plotting to kill Jesus and commit, they were concerned about this woman supposedly that was taken in adultery, while at the same time they were trying to figure out how they could put him to death. Interesting. They were worried about her having broken one of the 10 commandments by committing adultery, while at the same time they were breaking one of the 10, and as I call them, the big 10. They were guilty of conspiring to commit murder. And so while I don't necessarily think there's big sins and little sins, I do find it difficult to understand, the idea of stoning someone who has committed adultery while you yourself are plotting murder and to put someone to death. Our time's about up. Does anyone have any questions or comments this morning? Anything else?
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.